An often underrated aspect of gaming that I feel doesn't nearly get as much talk as it deserves would be the level and area design. They may seem small and minuscule, but in reality, levels may actually be the biggest factor within the playthrough of a game. You can boast about the greatest graphics, combat, mobility, and enemies you want, but you'll need to prove that you can strut the strut in some way. And levels act as the conduits through which those mechanics are tested. Expert enemy design and placement that works within the level's aesthetic, setting the story and progression? Check! Variety in locales via details, elevation, and other elements? Yep. Fun ways to explore and advance through the level, all while testing your combat and skills? Definitely. And nobody knows this motto like the team over at FromSoft, who have practically mastered the art of level design and redefined it in the modern age of gaming, creating such breathtaking locales that expertly construct and layer the world, twisting and turning in all sorts of ways that make it feel connected, as well as pace the game's difficulty, enemies and bosses, play, and even lore because they are just that big-brained. Time after time, they continue to raise the bar, with that bar being further raised by Sekiro. Despite taking place only within a select mountain range, the level design still manages to cram in quite the variety in its locales, all while incorporating a level of verticality and exploration we haven't seen the likes of. And today, I want to count down my 5 favorite zones in Sekiro. Now, just as a quick note before we start, because I'm sure there will be some people who have some questions on what I mean by zone, because technically speaking, each major location is split into a number of areas, meaning that excluding important locations and the times when certain zones get a revisit with a few changes later, there are only 8 zones in the game. So, for this list, I will be counting the areas split within the zone and factoring into my ranking, but the zone as a whole is what I'm truly looking at. How do all these parts, the enemies within, the aesthetics, and the challenges presented come together to form a whole package? As always, keep in mind that this is all my personal opinion, and that nobody else's was factored into this ranking. If you disagree with the placement of some of these, or alternatively don't see an area like on the list, then please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. I always appreciate and welcome discussion and debate, so long as it's civilly conducted. With all that said, hope you all pack the latest up-to-date maps and your best grappling hook, because we're going on a little tour. These are my top 5 favorite Sekiro zones. Is it the obligatory beginning area? Yes it is. But damn it if it doesn't do its job well of introducing the players to the game, the movement, enemies, mini-bosses, combat, and more. The ASHINA Outskirts is basic, but that's what makes it work so well. Everything you could possibly learn within the first few hours of a game in one single big area. And I'll be going over it step by step. Within the first section, you are introduced to a smaller, more controlled template of what kind of situations you'll have to deal with, as well as the multi-layered approach that you can take. From the first mini-boss onwards, you'll encounter a bit more trouble in the form of a pretty big outpost filled with watchtowers, buildings, and ramps to factor alongside the enemies and one giant just somewhere in there. Here, the mindset of taking down enemies tactfully is applied, as no way will a beginner like you be able to handle all of them at the same time. So you have to look around and utilize your mobility and grappling hook to get vantage points where enemies of interest lie. This continues on for a bit before you arrive at the dreaded ogre staircase, which offers such a simple design but is so evil when considering the ogre's main attacks. After dying a good few hundred times to the ogre, you move on to yet another mini-boss situation, combined this time with enemies. You've dealt with both of them before separately, now try them both together. The next section acts more like a stage piece, but boy is it a well done, nerve-wracking set piece that emphasizes the importance of stealth in dangerous, sometimes unwinnable situations. I mean, come on! It's a giant fucking snake wrapping around an entire canyon! That's terrifying! And that moment where it peeks through the terrain in the bridal offering tent? Lastly, you're introduced into the usual pre-boss walk-up, with some more enemies that will need to be taken care of precisely if you don't want them all on you, and then finally your first main boss of the game. Just like that, all of the game's essential mechanics and combat options are introduced to the player, encounter by encounter, step by step, building off of one another or even combining several aspects together in order to prepare us for the rest of the game. Did I need to go into a step-by-step guide of this place? No. No, I didn't. But it's still a great opening to the game regardless. An important aspect of designing a game is planning out the natural or intended flow of progression, not just in terms of difficulty, but also in how the locations escalate or fit within your narrative. The big special set pieces wouldn't be so special if you just plop it at the beginning of the game, so you've got to structure it out smart. And in this game, what might often be one of the last locations in any other game is instead the second or third main area you go through. Normally, this wouldn't exactly work, but because of how the plot changes focus, as well as incorporating the trope of revisiting an area with a couple of changes each time, ASHINA Castle fits in as a nice gear change in the game's flow. And to be clear here, I am specifically putting in the first visit, as I feel that it offers up the most satisfying climb of the free versions. Rather than barging through the front door, you are forced to explore around the side sections to figure out a way up, resulting in perhaps one of the most expansive areas in the game in terms of routes available. You could of course go to the right and begin climbing, or alternatively, you could go to the left, and depending on the path you go through, end up back at the Ashina Reservoir. Or you could go across the bridge, climb over the gate, and come across the abandoned dungeon entrance. And all of these sections provide some challenge, from trying to eliminate everybody in the reservoir and then being killed over and over again by the 7 spears, to trying the front gates and fighting against the crowd, walking across the roof and avoiding incoming dive bombs, and then even the inside as you deal with the elites of the Ashina style. There are also plenty of great memorable moments to find here. Everyone, and I do mean everyone, can relate to getting randomly killed by a guy swooping in at Mach speeds, or the utter shock of the Ice Swordsman, or even Genichiro himself and the shit kicking he gave a lot of people. In terms of mobility, this area certainly ain't lacking, offering up the most verticality of any zone at this point in the game, as players try to continually find a way up, both inside and out. And by the time you reach the very top, everything below just feels so small. This zone is a classic trope of castle invasion, and it's just a really solid area that offers up so much exploration and challenge that it makes for a great turning point within the game. When you have an established central location within a narrative, I believe heavily in the value of using that location and all of its associations to their fullest potential. If you're in a fantasy medieval world, you just have to use a castle or kingdom. Not just because they are staples, but also because of how they characterize the world and the people in it. Not only that, but there are images and tropes associated with a castle that can either be utilized or subverted, making the areas even more distinct. And when I think of mountains, the image of a gigantic snake threatening to chomp down on me as I just try to simply cross a bridge is immediately what comes to my mind. In all seriousness though, the Sunken Valley Zone is probably the closest example I can think of when it comes to utilizing the utter size and scope associated with mountains. Not just being large, but also with the tiny crevices, valleys, and tunnels inside, creating a dichotomy between the two ideas that characterizes the Sunken Valley perfectly. The majority of this area you will spend either making jumps and grapples between ever-increasing or decreasing elevation, dealing with enemies on perhaps not too spacious areas, or alternatively, gigantic spaces indicating a larger-than-life threat that's watching your every movement, waiting in anticipation. Each section presents its own befitting challenges of the climate, with moments such as the gun fort standing out so much from just how hectic the encounter is. I would say that all of them sniping me from a distance with guns is unfair, but I have already been riddled with too many bullet holes, so I may as well shut up. Besides the obvious gunmen scattered throughout, Other enemies such as the Centipede mini-boss and the various monkeys within the valley utilize this space extremely well, often forcing you into encounters where running away may not exactly be the most advantageous. In a sense, the entire zone has a theme of mobility and space, with how you and the others deal with it being a key factor. The aesthetic is also pretty damn nice, making you really feel just how sharp the various heights and drop-offs are, and the cold wind blowing through the various passages. All of that is just capped off with the unique Bodhisattva Valley, still having an emphasis on scale, but in a different sense for the murky, bleak swamp below and the various statues of Buddha that are along the path above. Not too shabby for a place inhabited by a bunch of monkeys. I imagine the conversation for this next zone went something like this. Miyazaki-san, we have started development on the final area for that Sekiro project of yours, but we're kind of stumped on where to go next. Add in lots of water. What else? Make it the most beautiful zone in the game. Let's do it! Wow. Just wow. Honestly, if I was judging the entire list based on purely appearance, then this would reach number 1 instantly, without a shadow of a doubt, because Jesus, FromSoft, really trying to flex what you can do with this game, huh? Every inch of this area is just beautifully crafted, from the bridge entrance where you fight the corrupted monk, to the descent down, the gigantic swimming pool and the houses on the outset, and finally, the main palace at the very back. Not just in graphics, but also the detail and architecture that those who actually live in Japan could probably talk about better than I ever could. Even more surprising for this area is the way of progression that has to be taken. You'd think with this gigantic body of water you could simply swim to the palace. And you'd be correct, if someone didn't have you in their sights. The very instant you step and begin swimming in that water, no matter where you are, a lightning-charged soccer ball will be heading directly for your cranium, most likely resulting in your instant death and stupidification. Now, technically speaking, it isn't everywhere, as once you are close enough and can go under the palace platforms, you are safe, but still specific. So, because you can't swim all the way over, you are forced to go around, traveling through on top of all the houses, facing all the various enemies along the way. Lightning shooting dog, whatever the fucks, Okami clan women holding spears, swords, and more lightning, and the palace nobles, who will begin draining your youth the moment they spot you. If fully inflicted, this status basically spells your death, meaning that you either try and avoid confrontation, or take them out as fast and stealthily as possible. Which leads to honestly one of the most notable sections in the zone, where you have to sneak around the courtyard and take them out one by one, as well as having all the other enemies there to deal with. Once you get to the main palace, you have to deal with more Okami women, buildings and elevation to take advantage of, and eventually, the leader who's tormented you this entire time. With her dead, you now have the swimming pool to yourself, leading to a really cool sequence where, technically speaking, you head backwards through the water, then go for a weird but terrifying stealth section in order to get behind a locked door. All of this culminates into a straight path upwards to the very peak, as you ascend to meet the Divine Dragon. As the very last unique area in this game, the developers went all out and it shows, having such unique level design, mechanics, atmosphere, enemies, and more that it instantly stands out. But while this area is just so damn good, I do prefer another a bit more. As mentioned previously with the Sunken Valley, location plays a major factor in the development and characterization of the world and creatures that inhabit it. A good way of characterizing the world through a location is to utilize the culture surrounding it, especially if your location is based off of some real-world place. In that regard, I can think of no other area in the game that utilizes the location to its fullest potential more than the SENPOU Temple. Arguably one of the prettiest areas in the game with its mix of autumn colors with the hidden temple aesthetic, SENPOU Temple also delivers a gigantic slam dunk with the atmosphere it creates. This is the single most prominent zone where the Buddhist themes and ideas presented in the game can be seen, both in background and foreground details. The monks in their clothing and weaponry, the buildings and architecture throughout, the various statues that litter the place, and even the storyline of this place all tie together into the central theme. The cherry on top of this most likely centipede-infested cake for me being the battle theme for this area, which stands out in my mind so much from just how eerie it sounds. The constant back and forth, in and out chanting gets to me especially, doing an excellent job as well of showing just how far the monks have fallen off the rails of Buddha in their pursuit for immortality. A pursuit that's especially fucked if you read through some lore and item descriptions detailing how they quite literally sacrificed hundreds of children through their experimentation, which might include poor little Robert somewhere among all those pinwheels. In a way, this area and the culture both meets, but also defies the expectations delivered by us and how we usually see Buddhist-inspired locations in gaming, creating a dichotomy so staggering that we just have to pay attention. And all of these details never sacrifice any element of challenge or gameplay presented throughout, with plenty of powerful enemies scattered around, as well as a mix of wide, spacious battle areas, building, climbing, and traveling, and the risky, vertical shafts and hallways that define the peril of a mountain. If you want to explore every inch of this place and gather all the items, you are going to have to do some really risky maneuvers and grapples. The zone smartly incorporates almost every aspect of mobility available, while still having space and diversity to ensure it never feels stale. Combine all of that and more with the lore, culture, inspirations, enemies, and challenge the area presents, and you have without a doubt my favorite zone in the entire game. A zone that doesn't just embody exploration, but practically begs for you to discover all that it offers and hides. I have been the Monarch of Dragons, and next time we will be discussing something more miniature in scale.